Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're putting a magnifying glass up to a piece of pop culture history that you probably think you know all about. But I guarantee you the true story is infinitely more fascinating. We're talking about the 1966 TV series, The Green Hornet. Now forget the nostalgia for a second. We're going to dive into the cold, hard data and the actual behind-the-scenes receipts that prove this show wasn't just some quirky product of its time. It was the absolute spark, literally the patient zero for the entire modern action genre we know today. Let's get into it.
If you look at how history usually writes about the Green Hornet, it almost universally gets brushed off as a campy 1960s relic. The overarching narrative, it was just Bruce Lee's warm-up, playing the sidekick, Kato. It's framed as this charming, kind of goofy, but ultimately minor stepping stone on his path to global superstardom. But when you actually dig into the production history, that narrative is completely backward.
Section 1. The Myth of the Warm-Up. Why 1966 was actually patient zero. Section 2. Breaking 1960s TV physics. When reality hit the screen.
Over the next few minutes, we're going to look at the receipts proving that not only was Bruce Lee doing the heavy lifting for this network TV show, but he was actively inventing the visual language of modern action cinema, all while executives barely even understood what they were looking at. Because when his reality hit the screen, the technology literally could not handle it. Notice the stark contrast we've got bouncing onto the screen right now. On one side, you have your standard 1960s TV action. You know, those theatrical, larger-than-life Adam West pow punches that missed the stuntman by a solid foot. But on the other side, Bruce Lee was bringing actual grounded Jeet Kune Do to the set. Chain punching, devastating sidekicks, the famous one-inch punch, right there on network television. This wasn't stage combat anymore. This was the very first time the American public saw real Jeet Kune Do in their living rooms. And man, it created a massive technical crisis for the crew.
The real story actually comes down to one specific number, 32. Standard American television cameras back then were designed to shoot at 24 frames per second. But Bruce Lee was striking so incredibly fast that the film physically couldn't capture him. On a standard 24-frame camera, his limbs were literally just a blur. So to capture his movements cleanly, the crew actually had to overcrank the cameras to 32 frames per second just to get clear footage of him moving. He was literally overwhelming the hardware of the era.
I mean, think about the absolute absurdity of this for a second. Directors actually had to pull Bruce Lee aside and beg him to slow down his punches. Here you have a generational martial arts prodigy, and he's being ordered to purposefully fight worse, to actively diminish his own physical genius. Why? Just so the television audience's eyes and the studio's cameras could actually comprehend what was happening. Wild, right?
Section 3. The Secret Leading Man, carrying the show from the number 2 slot.
So the technical receipts are incredible. But the business side of things is where this story takes an amazing turn. The data paints such a vivid picture. As you can see in the bright animated breakdown we've got up here, while Van Williams was the titular lead, the overwhelming majority of the pie, that belongs to Kato. The studio's fan mail, the distinct rating spikes during the episodes, almost all of the foreign sales interest, it was all explicitly tracking back to scenes featuring Bruce Lee. And the network realized this so quickly that by the time season promos rolled around, ABC actually started marketing Kato instead of the main character.
You see, the prevailing con of 1960s Hollywood was this deeply ingrained belief that an Asian man could not carry an American television show. Bruce Lee completely proved them wrong, purely by force of sheer charisma. Industry insiders admit today that without Bruce, the show likely would have been canceled by episode 3. Instead, he carried the entire production from the sidekick slot. He successfully sold the series across Asian markets, and he became an international star long before he ever stepped foot on the set of Fist of Fury.
Section 4. Redefining Asian men on screen. The Rockefeller Test.
Bruce Lee wasn't just breaking cameras and boosting ratings. He was completely shattering the cultural stereotypes of his time. Before Kato, the roles offered to Asian actors in Hollywood were, frankly, incredibly demeaning. They were largely relegated to playing the houseboy, the laundryman, or some villainous caricature like Fu Manchu. Then Bruce Lee steps onto the set and presents a character who is fiercely competent, effortlessly cool, and physically untouchable. He defeated every henchman in his path, and crucially, he never once spoke in the broken English that Hollywood typically forced upon Asian actors. He flipped the paradigm overnight.
Today, the media loves to talk about the importance of representation, right? Usually with massive press tours. Bruce Lee did it in 1966 simply by showing up and being undeniably excellent. And this brings us to a crucial concept, the Rockefeller test. You measure true cultural impact not just by the visual optics of who is on screen, but by observing a fundamental change in physical behavior. And what was the behavior change in 1966? Kids of all backgrounds, across the entire country, immediately started going out to school playgrounds and trying to recreate Kato's flying kicks. That is genuine, undeniable cultural impact.
Section 5. Patient Zero for Modern Action, the 1966 Blueprint. Okay, let's get into the actual cinematography. The exact blueprint that Bruce Lee laid down in 1966 that Hollywood still completely relies on today. If you watch the famous alley fight from episode 1 of The Green Hornet, you are looking at the exact DNA of modern action choreography. First off, wide shots showing the full bodies of the performers so you can actually see the geography of the fight. Second, no wires, and more importantly, no rapid cuts every half second to hide bad stunt work. And third, real contact. The stuntmen were making real physical contact, just pulling their strikes mere inches short of a devastating impact. When you trace this evolution, it builds perfectly to the modern era. People constantly, and I mean constantly, credit The Matrix in 1999 for introducing real martial arts to US media. But just follow the timeline. Bruce Lee invented this visual language in 1966, working on a tight 26-episode ABC network budget. That exact style paved the way for the Jackie Chan era of the 80s, which led to The Matrix, which directly inspired the John Wick franchise and those intense MCU hallway fights we see all the time today. It all traces straight back to Kato's alley fight. That's not just mythology, that is backed up with hard receipts.
Section 6. Hollywood's 50-year chase. The audience was ready.
Now, the great tragedy here is that the audience was totally ready for this revolution. It was the studio executives who completely missed the boat. Just follow this incredibly frustrating timeline. The Green Hornet airs from 1966 to 1967 and gets canceled after just one season. The executives fundamentally didn't understand the gold mine they were sitting on. So in 1971, Bruce Lee leaves for Hong Kong and makes The Big Boss. By 1973, that movie opens to a massive $3.2 million in the US. That was an absolutely colossal number for a foreign film back then. Then, tragically, Bruce Lee dies, and suddenly, retroactively, Hollywood is desperately banging down the door wanting everything he represented.
This whole situation is perfectly summarized by what industry folks called the 12T problem. The studios had the right effort, but it was aimed entirely in the wrong direction. American networks literally had Bruce Lee in millions of living rooms on a weekly basis, and they canceled him. Then, the American film industry spent the next 50 years desperately trying to chase down, recreate, and buy back the exact magic they already had in their hands and threw away. It's absolutely mind-blowing when you think about it.
Which leaves us with a massive, industry-altering what-if scenario for pop culture history. What if Bruce Lee gets handed a real, fully funded lead role in Hollywood in 1967, instead of having to go overseas and prove it until 1973? Does the entire global martial arts cinema boom happen a full decade earlier? How radically does the landscape of 1970s and 80s action cinema change if that spark ignites immediately?
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Think about the shows you're watching right now. Who is the modern Kato? Who is the wildly talented, undeniable force currently stuck in the number 2 sidekick slot, quietly carrying an entire production on their back while the executives focus on the titular lead? Let me know your thoughts on who that secret superstar is today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.